Hello, I'm State Representative Janine Nodder, welcoming you to another edition of Chattin' with Janine. My guest this week is a Merrimack resident who is also now an author, and that's our friend Ellen Kolb. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, Janine.
It's been a while since you've been on the show.
Well, thanks for having me back.
So when you told me that you wrote a book, I immediately thought, oh, she wrote a book about hiking and the trails, the best trails, and then when I saw the book, I'm like, okay, it's called Pro-Life Journeys, but there is a trail.
Yes, there is. As a matter of fact, I took that picture out at Odiorn Point State Park, out on the seacoast, but it seemed to illustrate the idea of journeys and pathways very well.
So I ran there this summer. I parked at Wallace Sands Beach, and I went for a nice, I think it was 12 miles that day. I got in.
Well, if I ever do compile blog posts from New Hampshire, Odiorn Point's definitely going to be in there.
Well, we have 13 miles of coastline, but that's my favorite part of it, is up there on that north part. So you have a book, and it's a quick read. I read through it. A lot of familiar names in the book. There's a whole chapter about Lynette Peterson, who was a state representative for 2 terms and a host on Merrimack TV, Late Night with Lynette. I'm sure you've been on it. Yes, I have too.
The famous plaid blazer.
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, so that now the viewers who've been watching Merrimack TV a long time, I'm like, they're remembering, oh no, the one with the jacket, yes, and I heard she still has it. She still has the coat. I'm like, well, when you come to visit New Hampshire, you leave it in Texas, yes. And then one of the chapters you mentioned Darlene Pollock, who has also been a guest on this show more than once, a very sad topic about human trafficking, because she herself was trafficked as a young person.
Well, you know, the way the book came together is it is an anthology of posts from the first 10 years of a blog I keep called Leaven for the Loaf, and it's primarily on pro-life issues and people in New Hampshire. And after 10 years, I thought, just for my readers to thank them, I wanted to put together sort of a best of collection. I figured I'd basically run it off at Staples and hand it out. And then as I went through the posts, I realized 2 themes were coming out very strongly. One was policy, and you'll notice there's 2 chapters in there about a policy issue that hasn't gone well, and then one that did. But more importantly, people, the people I'd met, who have amazing stories, who came to their beliefs and the work they do through some very unexpected paths. And I thought, these are the stories I want people to share. These are the stories I want people to hear about. These are the stories that'll last long after my blogging is over. This is what I want people to hear about.
So I used to read your blog. I haven't for a while, I don't know why, but Leaven for the Loaf. How did you come up with that title?
I was thinking in terms of a biblical reference to how a little bit of leaven makes the whole thing rise. If I'd given it more thought, I'd probably find something shorter and punchier, but you learn about blogging as you go along, and sometimes when you start, you don't know it all. But that's where it came from, was the idea of something small affecting something larger in a good way. So
do you have 2 different blog sites, or is it all one?
No,
and one section is life and one section is hiking?
I have multiple sites, and I write for others. EllenKolb.com is my sort of umbrella site. It's a portfolio with samples from each thing. But in addition to writing about policy up in Concord, I also hike a lot. I love hiking. Granite State Walker is where I write about southern New Hampshire trails. And if I ever pull together an anthology from that, I would love to share that, because it's the quiet trails I like, not the white mountains that everybody goes to, but the urban trails, the forests around here. Very beautiful.
So Ellen Kolb, is that all run together?
Yep.
And there's no E on the end of your name.
That's right.
Although St. Maximilian Kolbe has an E on the end of his name, and since the time I met you until an hour ago, on my cell phone, I had your name spelled Kolbe, but I just took the E off.
As long as you get the phone number right, we're good. But
okay.
ELLENKOLB.com.
Okay. So and that's where they can find all these
You can
things.
find links to just about everything I write about, because I'm all over the place. There's no single topic I can concentrate on.
So I wanted to give a shout out to Darlene, because she has been on the show before, and this is her book, Testimony. She's also part of another book, and I thought I grabbed the right one, but I didn't. This one's called Personhood, the Tree of Life.
Well, you know, Darlene's a remarkable person. I've known her for many years.
We're the same age.
And I had actually worked with her for a while before she publicly shared her story of having been trafficked as a teenager. sexually trafficked here in New England. You think things like that don't happen here. Well, after many years, when she did begin to speak about it, as she told me, and I shared that in the blog, people said, "You can't talk about this." And she said, "No more secrets. No more secrets. I'm the exception. When people talk about children who were born out of sexual violence or conceived in sexual violence,
That's
they're talking about me."
And her daughter was also
Conceived in violence.
Yes.
And was born, and Darlene is now a grandmother. She has shared her story for many years now. But a remarkable woman, a woman of resilience, a New Hampshire neighbor. She's raised her family here, and she has a story worth sharing and remembering.
I used to see her in Concord. She used to testify, but
yep, she's got family responsibilities now, and grandbabies, and she has a good life and has stepped back from the public eye. And that's the case for several of the people I've written about. It can be very intense. Being involved in public policy, very intense, sharing personal stories like that, and it's really not something you want to spend your life doing. But these people went to the trouble of sharing something very personal and very life-affirming. So I'm very glad that I took notes when it happened, posted when it happened, and I can share it again now.
So one of the chapters in the book is about Griffin's Law.
Yes.
But I think it was when we finally passed that bill, there was another baby.
Sarah's and Griffin's Law.
Sarah and Griffin's Law. So should we talk about that?
That is the best example I know of how persistence in public policy, if you want something, stick with it, build a team, and it can happen.
I know you mentioned the signing. I'm like, oh yes, I was there too.
Yes.
I was there.
This is a law regarding what's called fetal homicide. Many states have these laws. It allows, does not mandate, but allows prosecutors to seek charges if someone injures a pregnant woman through an act of violence against the mother's will and causes the death of her child. In New Hampshire, in 2006, there was a particularly gruesome situation in Manchester where a drunk driver hit a woman who was 7 months pregnant. Her child was born by cesarean immediately afterwards and died 2 weeks later by what the medical examiner said was trauma inflicted in the crash in utero. Well, the drunk driver was convicted of many things. He appealed all of them, and he lost all his appeals except one, and that was for the death of the infant. And the Supreme Court wrote unanimously, if the legislature finds this outcome as unfortunate as we do, it will change the state law as it pertains to the homicide of a fetus. It was 2006 when the wreck happened, 2009 when the Supreme Court handed it down. Finally, in 2016 or 17, we got a fetal homicide law. There was tremendous resistance because people mistakenly thought that it was an attack on a woman's right to choose abortion. And it's not. It was not going to apply to anything except a death that took place against the mother's will. People had argued for it for years and years and years. And what happened was families who lost children would much rather keep it private. It's a very painful thing to talk about the loss of a child late in pregnancy. One family came forward from the North Country and talked about the child they'd lost to a collision.
I did a show on it. I remember Leon coming down.
I remember the photograph they showed legislators
yes, I remember
of that little
photo
baby
too, and he had a bruise on his cheek.
Who was delivered by cesarean, bruise on his cheek, did not survive because of the force.
And he showed the picture. Look, this is a baby. How could you say it's not a baby? It's a baby.
And there were concerns, again, people were very sympathetic to the family, but couldn't quite get enough votes to get it over. Then a second family came forward. The death of their child had occurred 11 years earlier, and they stepped forward. Took a lot of courage to be able to take something very private and talk to legislators about it, go public about it, but they did, and that made the difference. It was people one at a time through the years getting on board. Finally, these two families, they got the bill passed. I was there when Governor Sununu signed it. It was a tremendous example of
I have it in my scrapbook. You're in the pictures.
How you can prevail and do the right thing, even if it seems like it's not going to happen. I thought that was a wonderful story to share, and I was that's the longest chapter in the book, and it's the one that was the most gratifying to write because it did end so well.
I actually gave floor speeches on fetal homicide more than once, and Case in point, I would talk about California. Liberal, liberal California. They have a fetal homicide law. So Stacy Peterson, remember that case?
Yes.
Her
Lacey Peterson.
Lacey.
Yeah.
Wow, Stacy. It's been a while. Lacey Peterson, and her husband's first name was
Scott
Peterson.
The Unborn Victims of Violence
Connor,
Act is
yes.
what came out in the wake.
So Connor
situation.
Peterson was the baby, and if you recall, the baby's body washed up on shore. I think it was missing a head, or was that her that was missing?
The child died due to violence inflicted
Yes.
on the mother.
So Scott Peterson went to jail, first-degree murder for murdering his wife, Lacey, and second-degree murder for the death of Connor, the baby. And as I recall, he didn't want to be married anymore. Move on, and that was how.
Whatever the circumstances, life deserves to be protected. Life deserves to be protected under law. Prosecutors should have the option of pursuing charges that recognize that a human being was affected by an act of violence. Fetal homicide gives prosecutors that tool.
So tell me about the process of getting a book together. I mean, every single person you meet has a story to tell. Anybody can write a book because everyone has a story. But how do you do that?
Literally millions of books are in print. Amazon publishes tens of thousands a year, and that's what I did, self-publishing through Amazon. Part of my material was already there because I had been blogging for a decade on these topics. And I thought it would be easy. I'm just going to take posts and reproduce them and put them together. But in pulling them together, again, those themes came out, and I realized I wanted to stress personal stories. Things needed to be updated. Someone who was very public 10 years ago might have stepped back now, and I wanted to check with them. Should I use your name, your last name? Do you just want the first name? Some things needed to be rewritten because I'd written them in a hurry to blog, and I didn't have the luxury of editing them more carefully, and I did that now. So there's a process of pulling all the stories together, then deciding how to publish them. And I went to Amazon and their Kindle Direct Publishing and walked through the steps there, and very awkwardly, very gradually, the whole process from thinking of the project to publication took about a year.
That's not bad.
But the Amazon Kindle site was very helpful with the technical part. But the writing took place over a long period of time, and I just had to select what stories to include.
Yeah,
and
I
rewrite
wanted
them
to
as
ask
needed.
you about that because you're the second person in the last few months that I know that has a book that's small like this, self-publishing. But how, is it, what, 67 pages total? Now, is there like a criteria, like you can publish a book for X amount of money if it's this many pages, or how does it work, or why is it so short? Because I know you have a lot more stories.
This was, as I said, started out as sort of a thank you to the reader, so I wasn't setting out to write a big volume. But when you self-publish through the platform that I used, it can be as short or as long as you please. Amazon can put anything up in an ebook format, but then for printing, as you set it up in their template, it will tell you, okay, you have X number of pages, it's black and white, no color illustrations, and it will cost X amount. And then you don't pay it unless you order. It's print on demand.
Okay.
Print on demand. So I could literally not invest a penny on the book until I want to get print copies. But the ebook is always available.
Are you working on another book?
I'm constantly blogging. Blogging from the trails in Granite State Walker, blogging from Concord at Leaven for the Loaf, blogging about my faith, which goes under the overall blog. So I'm constantly writing blog posts. Whether they will develop into a book, we'll see. But there's always a hiking book sneaking around there because I really think it's an underserved market for those of us who live in the southern tier and want to enjoy what's around us right here. There's so much for people to discover real close to home, but that's for another day.
Well, I've been hiking with you before.
Yes, you have.
And Lynette Peterson. The first hike was
You have
Indian Head.
You have helped to pull me up many a hill that I thought I couldn't
Yes,
get up.
I remember you were wearing a kerchief, and Lynette called you Mother Hubbard.
Yes,
and then she
Lynette
shortened
with her
it
nicknames,
to
MH.
Yeah, MH. Yeah, come on, MH. It's funny, and I had
I had
kids
so
with
much
me.
fun. When she left office, I wanted to interview her for the blog about what's it like to serve, because New Hampshire has the amazing 400-person legislature, House, that gets paid $100 a year, which makes it unlike any other legislative body in the United States. And normal people, what you think of as normal people,
Oh, yeah.
get
Lynette,
elected.
normal people.
And I said to her, can you sit down and talk to me about your time, your term? What made you run? How did you serve? What do you think was undone? And I always enjoyed talking to her. The interview was a riot, but
well, Lynette's a riot.
That was one of the stories I wanted to be sure to include, because I think it's a good thing for people to know that, yeah, maybe that is within my range. Maybe I can serve my neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and her story, of course, I know her story, and I could hear her voice, and she always, oh my word, oh my word. So, oh my word is in there.
I tried to preserve her voice because she's an original.
Mm-hmm. And her fast-paced walking can never keep up.
It's actually something I enjoy about writing other people's stories, is capturing their own voice. Mm-hmm. I have my own style of writing, but when I'm writing someone's story, I want it to come across in their voice, and I think Lynette's
Speaking
did.
of voices, I'm currently reading Mike Pence's book, because he gave me a copy and signed it and everything, and I can hear his voice, and I'm like, And he's from Indiana. He loves Indiana. And I'm like, the first half of the book is all about the Hoosiers, which I don't care anything about the Hoosiers. I'm like, I'm suffering. So now he's talking about his time in Washington, and now I it's easier to read.
Well, it's interesting when someone writes about the area they're from, because for pro-life journeys, obviously the stories, many of them are based here in New Hampshire or New England. But I'm sharing it with friends and family far away. I said, some of what I'm writing about is definitely New Hampshire specific, but these stories don't have any boundaries. The actual way we pass policy might be different from the way it's done in your state, but any of these people I write about, any of these women, could be your neighbor, could be someone you know. I really want these stories to get out there.
You've been a lobbyist.
I have.
And so you had to wear the orange badge.
Yep, and I'm retired now. I can run off my mouth for free.
So before that, though, when did you start going to Concord and listening in? And do you testify every time you go up? Or
I
have
not lately. I did it first. I started going in the late 1980s when I had 3 little kids that I would bring with me up there. And I was interested in policy. I was interested in learning about the process, because New Hampshire was very different from Florida, where I grew up. It's so open, so accessible. And over the years, from volunteering, speaking on topics that meant a great deal to me, the right to life of each human being, I gradually came to work with nonprofit organizations, and when the kids were grown, went to work as a lobbyist for nonprofit organizations in Concord, and loved doing that from about 2009 until 2020. It was just before COVID that I retired from that. And now I'm going back up to Concord now and enjoying listening to hearings, learning about policies that I hadn't given much thought to before. I haven't had time. But listening to people, talking with them, learning about new things. I always feel very much at home at the State House, and every New Hampshire resident should feel at home at the State House.
And I saw you in the gallery one day. I'm like, why did you tell me you were there? I would have had you announced. So next time you go, let me know, and I'll have them announce you.
Merrimack neighbor should know, if you ever want to visit the State House during a session day, talk to one of your reps, and they will have you introduced.
Mm-hmm. And everyone will stand up and clap look for you in the peanut gallery, like, oh, there she is.
I love this state that way. It's different from any other. I've visited, in the course of my work, I've been down to Boston and to Hartford to legislative sessions for hearings on bills similar to what we have. And it's just a very different vibe when you walk into a building full of professional politicians. It's very different from walking into a building full of neighbors. I can run into you at the grocery store, or run into one of the other reps in another thing, and start talking about the policies you're doing. You have to face neighbors. There's no wall. There's really no division. I love that about New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's good. My mind just went blank. I had a question for you, and I don't know what it was. So if you were me and you were going to ask you a question, what would you ask?
What's the best news about what's going on in New Hampshire with the right to life? Everybody thinks in terms of Dobbs, thinks in terms of people pitted against each other.
Let's talk about Dobbs for a minute, because it is so misunderstood.
Well, it is misunderstood, but the worst thing about it is when people see positions instead of people when they look at each other. I want people to understand, I may disagree with you on this, but I'm still your neighbor, and we still need to live together. We still need to get along. Look at the pregnancy care centers that are thriving in New Hampshire. These are places that will not perform abortions, will not refer for them, and they're very upfront about that on their web pages. But they will provide not only care for pregnant women, but support for the young families, parenting classes, access to medical care. These are remarkable places. They are all over the state, and they have very quietly been growing over the past 30 years. And some of them have suffered vandalism since the Dobbs
North
decision.
Country, yes.
And they keep coming back. They keep coming back. They are determined to keep on serving people regardless of what goes on politically. That is great news. I think that's really an underreported story.
Okay, I have a note here. The Dobbs decision did not ban abortions, which people were lied to at the last election, and they believed that abortions were banned. They were banned. No one can get one. What it did was it kicked it back to the states to let each state decide their own policy.
There was absolutely nothing in it that recognized anyone's right to life.
And I had a really hard time talking to people about that because they wouldn't believe me. I said, call an abortion clinic and ask. Oh, I will. Well, did you?
No, the fact is that there is no recognition of the right to life on either the federal or the state level, which means there's plenty of work to do. But New Hampshire's been in that position for many, many years. Nothing has really changed, except that now there will be a strong push to try to put abortion into the New Hampshire Constitution as a right, and the debates will continue. Nothing is settled, and everything that I have worked for and written about trying to advance recognition, not granting, but recognition of the right to life of each human being without exception, that work continues. I'm ready for it.
So when it comes to innocent human life, the smallest among us, do you think that hearts will ever be changed?
One story at a time, one relationship at a time. That's how it'll be done. It's not going to be done from speeches. There's a place for speeches. But speeches are generally good for encouraging those who need encouragement, who already agree with you. Mm-hmm. Hearts are changed from one-on-one conversations, from relationships built over time, when trust is developed. That's what changes hearts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough.
And that, again, that comes back to individual stories. Writing about, most of them are women. Writing about these women was good for me in how encouraging and inspiring they were all over again.
How have you been treated over the years by the opposition?
It depends. Sometimes not courteously, sometimes very courteously. If they see only an orange badge, if they see a position instead of a person, people feel free to be verbally abusive. I've only been physically threatened once. A police officer was called by a bystander immediately, and the situation was under control very quickly. But if I depended on courtesy to get out of bed in the morning, I'd have quit this business a long time ago.
Back a long time ago, when I used to freelance in California, I would try to talk to both sides, but the other side didn't want to talk to me. Like, no, I saw you talking to them. I don't want to talk to you. Like, okay,
I was up at a hearing yesterday in Concord, and there was very much an us versus them vibe. Okay, I'm still going to try to have the conversations, because regardless of how public the hearings are, regardless of the signage and the optics, it's the quiet conversations that take place with legislators before the hearing that determine how it's going to go. Most of the time when a hearing begins, a legislator already knows how they're going to vote, and you know it. The private conversations, the private conversations will always, always be more influential than rallies.
Now, occasionally there has been a floor speech that has changed my mind. Case in point, Campbell, former Representative Campbell, a Democrat from Nashua. He got up to give a speech, and it was about ethanol. And I was absolutely fascinated by his speech and everything he said, and I'm like, well, I'll be darned. I actually agree with this guy, and I voted with him.
That's
and because he gave a very good speech, and he changed my mind.
And you were open to listening to it.
Yeah.
You'd be careful when you listen to people. You'd be surprised at what gets into your head.
And I've also learned how you give a speech really matters, because it's so easy to just get mad and you want to be sarcastic, but that doesn't get you any votes. And nobody's going to change their mind. They might not change their mind anyway. But you catch more flies with honey.
Yeah. And if I want to make a point, I can do that in writing. But if I just try to make a point with another human being, again, I reinforce what I already believe, and I do very little to persuade them. Let's listen to each other.
Well, sometimes, we do give the courtesy, but sometimes I cannot change my mind
Well,
on
it was
some
it was
things.
time for me to retire because when you go into a hearing room, you need to realize, okay, here's people I have to talk to. Here's people I want to listen to. And when you walk in and start seeing positions rather than people, it's time to turn the job over to someone with a fresher view. It's time to step back because you won't benefit anybody if you're up there feeling like there's a moat between you and the rest of the world.
Yeah, so Judiciary is a committee that hears most of the life
Yes.
bills, and we have a lot of freshmen on Judiciary this
It's
term.
the personalities of the committees change over time. With each election, there's a new batch of people on there. I've been up there when one party or another has, through a wave, taken over most of the seats. I've been up there in terms like this one, where it's evenly divided. So yeah, the committees each have their own personality, but that personality varies from election to election. And I know Judiciary, I know HHS, there are certain committees I just know I'm going to be seeing a lot.
Well, Ellen, we are down to the last minute.
Okay.
So we can't do any call to action, but if somebody wants to find out more about you or your blog,
Please go to ellenkolb.com and you can get an idea of the things I write about. My interests are wide. I have a hard time concentrating, but that's a great thing about writing. I don't have to concentrate.
it comes naturally to you. Well, I'm proud of you for writing a book.
Thank you.
And I've enjoyed our hikes, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thanks, Janine. It's good to be here.
Thank you. I'll see you again.
Okay.
I'll see you in Concord, and I will not see you, but you can see me, and I'll be back again soon with some new shows.